Hi guys and gals, I'm back, my voice has been healed and I'm ready with a new video. And I thought that today I wanted to talk about my painting process, kind of like the steps that every drawing basically that I make undergo while I explain it, with this piece of my OC Diabolosa in the background. Because whenever I work on a bigger piece, and by that I mean usually when it's more than just a sketch, I have a very general procedure that I follow at the moment. And I thought, because some of you guys have been asking for it, that I wanted to explain it to give you a better insight into my workflow. But before we get started, I'm going to take a brief moment of your time to advertise for my own Patreon. Because I have a Patreon and I just did a whole bunch of new rewards over there. And you can sign up to become either my scout, my companion, or my hero. And we have some new tiers once we reach the milestones and all that jazz. But I'd really appreciate it if you would check it out. The link is in the description. But now I think we should just get started. First stage I usually go through is the idea and sketch phase. Lately I have found thumbnailing to be particularly helpful for idea generation. Then when I have a thumbnail that I'd like to develop into a drawing, I start with a rough sketch. And in this case I did some color exploration using that sketch as the base for a new thumbnail. Sometimes I have the thumbnails before, sometimes I experiment a little later. It really depends on how far the idea has developed into my mind. So once the sketch is done, I move on to line art. I'm currently exploring new brushes for line art, but I usually pick either the soft line art and hard blending brush from my own brush kit, which you can download for free on my Gumroad, or use something that kind of resembles ink or a pencil. Preferably something with a little texture and the option to vary the lines a lot. At the moment I'm particularly happy about Kyle's drawing box brush mega pack that you can also get for free. I put the link in the description or you can just Google it. My favorites right now are Kyle's drawing box, Animator Pencil 2016, and Kyle's ink box, amazing cartoon nib brushes. I also like to add very light shading with the brush at this point, especially around the facial area. Once the line art is in place, I move that layer to the top of my hierarchy of layers. Then it's time to color in the flats. If you're experienced enough to know what colors your character will have in a given setting that you're going to paint or you have in mind, you can just pick those colors. To me, it's still quite a challenge to imagine how my dear character here, Diabolosa, would look like in the kind of light setting I have planned. So I paint all the flats in local colors. That means basically the colors that she would have had if she had been displayed in a regular white light setting. I also put all of the different flat colors on individual layers. With simpler illustrations, I might make one flat layer for all the flat colors, but in this case I know that I need to do a lot of tweaking later, and it just becomes so much easier if I can select specific areas without interacting with the whole image at once. So that's why I'm keeping the flat colors on each separate layer. So for instance, I have one for skin, for the hair, for the cloth, and etc. After the flat layers have been placed, it's time to adjust the colors. So since Diabolosa here will be illuminated mainly by candlelight and a little bit of a backlight, I will now try to adjust her flat colors to better reflect that setting. Because I already painted the background in the colors I want, it gets easier for me to see if her adjusted colors fits into that setting. This is, by the way, also an excellent opportunity to use a lot of references for similar light settings. I just found a bunch of candlelight images on Pinterest and Google for reference. I typically use a combination of masking and layer adjustments and a bit of guessing, actually, to achieve the overlay of color that I was looking for. After I have adjusted the colors, I move on to the step that I call the initial shading. During this shading phase, I usually paint beneath the line art. And when I use the term shading, basically what I mean is painting in shadow and light, and the colors of those as well. So for instance, her hair is normally pretty dark turquoise and greenish, But in this light setting, where her hair is being illuminated by yellow candlelight, it turns way greener and lighter. One of the characteristics of my initial shading phase is that I often just use a big, soft brush. Anyway, with the initial shading, I just aim to get an idea of where the shadow and light areas are located before I move on to the actual shading, which is the next step. During this step, I sometimes paint underneath the line art, sometimes on top of it, sometimes a little bit of both. It depends on the painting. But it's basically just a more detailed shading step where I start shaping the character. So sometimes I would just paint on clipping mask to the flat color layers, but since I have a color adjustment layer in this painting, instead I make a selection of the area I want to shade, for instance the skin, by holding Shift while clicking the little thumbnail on the layer I want to select from. Then I hit Ctrl H to hide the selection because it gets pretty distracting and annoying to look at. And then I can paint on the new layer on top of the line art, for instance, but limited still to the active selection, which is right now the skin. So you can make this as simple or complex as you wish. It really depends on how you manage your layers and how many layers you want to work with. It is also during this step that I usually color the line art as well. And I usually always do that using clipping masks. Next step is the rendering / polishing, which I always do on top of the line art. I usually have at first 1 or 2 layers that I render on, and for some reason I like to have the rendering of the hair on a separate layer from everything else. I can't really explain it, that's just how it is. And basically what I do in this step is that I fill in details. I'm not afraid to paint over my line art in a lot of places, for instance. And the idea is that I want the character to look more three-dimensional instead of flat. So like her appearance in that room lit by the candles will seem more natural rather than unnatural, if that makes sense. And I rarely use any adjustments in this layer. It's just a little soft line art and hard blending brush with the smudge tool that I use. Both from my basic brush set that I mentioned before that you could go get for free and all that. The rendering process actually takes up about half of the time that I spent on the entire piece. So everything from thumbnailing, sketching, line arting, all that, it only takes up half the time, and rendering takes up the rest of the time. So since this is going to take a while, I'll just put on some music until I finish rendering, and I'll return to you for the last step. time to move on to the final step, which is final touches and adjustments. I like to have a merged version of all my layers at this point, so that I can adjust the whole image at the same time. I don't just merge all of my layers, I make a copy merged layers, okay? Keep your layers, for God's sake, in case you need to go back and change something. But I just use the Ctrl Shift Alt and E shortcut to make a new layer with everything visible merged together. And normally what I will do here is just tweaking the brightness, maybe the contrast, perhaps a bit of hue or saturation. I play with lights using overlay or color dodge layers. And I also blur or sharpen specific areas in the image. And when I'm done, or consider the painting done, I leave it for at least 12 hours. Then I open it again, and usually I find something I want to adjust or change, and then I'm practically done. And that's the painting process that I'm using at the moment, or that my paintings are undergoing, if you will. And hopefully that gives you some kind of insight in how I paint stuff. Lastly, I'd like to finish off by saying that this voice that actually sounds a little different from some of the other voices in this video is Nadia from the future, and I'm here to deliver a message. This video was actually supposed to come out way back in November, but I ran into some complications and I couldn't finish it, so here it is, just in case you wonder, because the next video I'm going to post is going to start out with an apology for why I haven't uploaded any videos this year yet. But you have this video now because I know the next video is a little delayed and I really wanted to give you something to look at. So that is the reason why my voice sounds a little different, because it is fully healed since that video I uploaded where I was very sick. But I will be back in approximately a few days with a new video for you guys. So thank you so much for watching this one and for even considering clicking the link and checking out my Patreon. So take care everyone, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.